without somebody crashing the door down and saying, we will take you away. History tells me how I'm paid for my work. We're all used to how we get paid. But I'm going to take you back to the beginning, and I'm going to say this is how this worker was paid, and this is how it changed, and this is why it changed. These are the historical factors that forced this change. And now, when somebody says to Brian, Brian, I'm going to take $2 an hour away from you, we got to figure out what the hell just happened to me. Because all of a sudden then, that blue-collar middle class that we are all a part of in some kind of way, or came through, or our parents or grandparents in many ways, is starting to change. What about it? So how we're paid is influenced by our history. How organizations are structured. The unions and management. And I was listening as you talked about now going from an adversarial system to a collaborative system. Your structure changed. Why? Because you looked at your history, you looked what was in front of you, and said, I guess this is the best way to go at this point in time. But I suspect, Bill, in the back of your mind, you still said to yourself, my history said, be careful. Well, and what's also important is that all of this is populated by people. And I always remember as a mediator, one of the first things I was confronted with when I came as a mediator was the Dayton Power and Light strike with your union a long time ago. And it was, as I recall, there was somebody killed on the picket line that happened there. Went through a long process. The parties changed enormously. They wrote a thing called a compact. I brought a copy for you so you can see it. And that compact lasted for about 20, 25 years. They really worked together. They really did things together. They remembered that that history had bad moments and good moments. But what they forgot is that if you change any of the cast of characters, the whole field changed. And all of a sudden somebody came in who said, I don't care about all of this arrangement. I'm going back there. And if I've given away all of my natural protections historically, now how do I prevent that from rolling back on me? And so people play a part in this history, and they can change it. But all of these things are progressing through time, if you will. Labor and employment law. For the vast majority of our history, there was no labor law. There was no employment law. And you say, well, why wasn't it needed? Because of power. Power in the beginning of our history from the union management standpoint and throughout history has been defined differently each time. And each time as the landscape changed, the union itself and management had to find out what power was going to be defined like now and how we were going to use it and how you were going to respond to it when it happened. And it only got to the point where my on-the-ground power wasn't sufficient, like it is today, that we started to be more dependent upon laws to protect me. Because I couldn't do it with my old muscle that we've used historically. Social legislation. Social legislation wasn't there in the beginning. We didn't have Social Security. We didn't have unemployment comp. We didn't have workers' comp. We didn't have any of that back in the 30s. Well, what were we doing? Well, how were the institutions protecting people? There were things that were built in. But as those conditions changed and the history changed, it became necessary to pass laws. Well, now everybody criticizes them. What's the next phase? Well, that's what we got to be prepared for. But I can't just say, oh, Social Security is going to go bankrupt, throw it away. Say that to somebody like me who's on Social Security and I will do something horrible to your body, okay? Or somebody who used to be on a defined benefit pension plan that got thrown away to a defined contribution pension plan. Oh, gee, now I realize new employees, that's all they have. But as an old employee who had one of those other kind, I'm going, God help you if you lose it. So my history tells me that's going to be a serious point, maybe 10 years from now, not very long from now. And if I don't understand that history, I will have conflict with you. I will fight you. Maybe I might have to anyway, but by God, at least if I understand my history, I can weave a new path, a middle ground to be created again. But with Bill's thought, I always keep my eye behind me. Why we discriminate. The very point, Jose, that you brought up. Why we discriminate. Throughout history, we have discriminated. But I'm going to use a different definition. And I want to trace those discriminations and those practices and how they were changed and then how they live on. Why are we violent? Our history, in the beginning of our history, because the power was in another area than here, we didn't have to be violent because you weren't violent because you didn't have any power to do anything to me. But it was only when the power started to shift historically throughout time in America did we have to defend ourselves. And when we did, violence inevitably came out of conflict. Why we can't trust. I always remember this, somebody always says to me, well, trust me, Don. And I'm saying, well, what does that mean? Trust me. Now, when I think about all of these things, there are a lot of things that in today's world seem very crazy to us and to people, young people. For instance, that's not in my job description. And everybody gets all upset, especially on the management side of the table. They say, well, you know, it's not in your job description. Or I say as a worker, it's not my job description. And the manager says, oh, well, I didn't hire for just those. I hired you for everything. And I said, no. The rates of pay have to meet, legally and technically negotiated, the description of the work I'm asked to perform. If you go beyond that, then at some point the rates of wages don't relate to what you asked me to do. And then my friend on the other side, who is very progressive in his view, or her view, says, yeah, but that doesn't matter. I just pay you. You do whatever I want you to do. And I said, no. There was a time that used to happen, and we stopped that. And then all of a sudden, unions are accused of, and we who defend a job description are accused of being rigid and not thoughtful in moving into the future. Well, in part, that's probably true. But how we get around that is, I don't defend it to the death, and you don't try to rip it out of me. We find a compromise and a way to make it work. And how we do that in every mediation I ever had is, I have to explain to people where the hell it came from, why it was important, why it still has a degree of importance to people, and how do we preserve that. That's from my experience. That's my information box in terms of conveying that. So when I think of all of these things, I think that labor history plays a role. It's important that we think about it. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to move over to the next page, and we're going to begin our journey. And you're going to see this funny little chart that you're going to see in your sleep for the next 10,000 years. And I have a little bit of an information box there. And the information box says the collective bargaining structure and leadership styles mirrored the American economy as it evolved over time from a craft economy to a mass production economy to a service economy. Any way you look at it, there have generally been three different types of economies in America. Something I call craft, which is where we made handmade goods in the beginning of our history, to moving to factories to mass production, to moving from factories to service. Many of you are in service. Most everybody in this room is in service. And now into data.